When I was 9 years old, 1999, I ran away from home. My father was a machinist and worked late nights, and my mother was my teacher. I was homeschooled and only knew these two people. My father was an abusive alcoholic and used to beat me, but never laid a hand on my mother. We lived in an underdeveloped business area in rural Alaska, miles from suburbia. It wasn't uncommon for business to start and tank within the same year, so when I left I found an abandoned building and decided to make my home there. I found a small broken window that led to the basement of a 4-story building and I broke in. There were signs that other people had come into this building before me, and me not really knowing how to talk to people had me very frightened. I explored for hours. The 3rd and 4th floor were in bad condition. There were holes in the walls, as if someone had come in and just smashed them. Broken chairs, tables, cabinets, all sorts of things. I found a room with a push lock on the door and decided to make my camp there. This was during a period where we only had sun for about 6 hours a day, so without natural light this building was pitch dark, and beyond freezing. In what I imagine was the middle of the night when I had dozed off, I heard glass shattering and the sound of a man screaming as if he was writhing in pain. It sounded as if he was breaking everything he could get his hands on. His voice seemed to split where he was screaming and wheezing as if it were two people. This terrified me. Even though I had the door locked and was on a different floor, I still worried for my safety. I flicked my lighter on and burned some manila folders to look around the room. I found a hole in the wall that was just big enough for me to fit in, so I dove in and crawled as far back as I could go. The man screamed for hours and wheezed. It sounded like he was being tortured, but he was the only one there. Eventually the screaming stopped. I heard his footsteps echo in the staircase between rooms. He made it to the floor I was on and it sounded as if he were dragging something behind him. He went into a different room and shattered some glass. He kept doing this for a while but never made a sound himself. I pissed myself in the wall, now terrified he'd punch through the wall of the next room and discover me. Eventually it was silent. For too long. I never heard him leave, and although I was tired I feared falling asleep, for if I snored he might discover me, and what would he do? After some quiet hours the doorknob to the room I was in shook. It shook a few more times, and then I heard a rattle. He took a key, placed it in the door and unlocked it. He stepped in and stayed silent for a few minutes. He left the room walking. Then he started running around in other rooms, and dragged something into the room adjacent to mine. Through the wall I could only hear a cracking sound. Then he started to chew very loudly and exclaim what he was eating was delicious. I didn't make a sound. I hadn't found any food in that building during my exploration, so he must have brought something in.
Would you like some?
He said in a hushed tone. I didn't respond. I imagined he was talking to himself.
Ever get the feeling you're being watched?
He laughed to himself.
I just know someone is here.
He rattled on while chewing and making that horrible cracking sound.
I'd really like a dinner guest sometime.
I had a lump in my throat I could not swallow. I had to clear it so bad, but I feared what this guy would do if I did, so I stayed quiet. I was so utterly terrified and cold from all of the windows being smashed and being wet from my piss I almost cried.
I'm going to give you till the count of 5.
I didn't dare move.
1,
I closed my eyes so tightly.
2,
He couldn't have known I was in here.
3.
I didn't know about God at the time, but I believe I prayed to some sort of higher being.
4.
I swallowed hard and took a deep breath.
5.
And he went silent. There were no noises for a long time. It may have been an hour, but I am not sure. I nodded off from pure exhaustion, and when I woke up it was still pitch black. I started to scuffle a little bit, totally forgetting where I was, and I froze when I realized. I didn't hear anything, so I waited for another few minutes, then left the wall. I exited the small hole and walked out of the room. The upstairs area was littered with drywall, glass, cigarette butts, alcohol cans, and debris. I couldn't remember where the stairwell was to leave, so I had to explore all over again. I eventually ended up in the room where the man spent the majority of his time, and that's when it all clicked. The room was covered in shit and blood. A deer carcass had been ripped apart in the room, and its intestines draped all over it. They hung through ceiling tiles and over desks like a canopy. I only realized when I smacked my face into a piece of its organs strewn across the walls. Remember, it was pitch black. I lit some more folders on fire and looked across the room. The skull had teeth marks punctured into it, and the eyes and teeth had been thrown around the room. I didn't know what to make of any of this, so I broke down crying. I left the building and continued onward towards my home. When I arrived, my mother yelled at me for being gone for 3 days. She quickly stopped when she saw I was covered in blood. When I explained the story, my father sat down with me and explained that this is why he keeps us away from other people, because
this is what they do.
I was terrified of people and lived with my parents and did not speak to any other people besides the two of them until I was 20 years old, 2000. And moved out when my mother died, and my father told me I was never really his son. I've lived a very strange life. I am 27 now and live on my own in Alaska.
Fucking Wendigos, man. And I can't grasp how your family was the only human one in the entire place. It seems odd.
What's at that building now?
That sent a shiver up my fucking spine reading that. My mother's cousin, a Native American, not her real cousin but a neighbor she grew up with, came to our house once to fix up our bathroom. And when I told him the story, he told me it was of the windwalker. We didn't have internet, or even books on the subject, so when I studied up on it later it made a lot of sense. I have spoken to many Native Americans about this very story and they all tell me I'm lucky to be alive. Pissing myself was the best thing I could do for myself because it has a hormone in it that wards off evil spirits. One guy told me the opposite though, saying that me pissing myself is how he was alerted to my presence. This was in northern Alaska. I'm in Anchorage now, so I have no idea.
Did you ever consider going back and taking him up on his dinner invitation?
The reason I bring the story up at all is because my father died sometime a week ago while on vacation from work. He must have been dead 4 days before someone found him. I'm supposed to go back up to claim the house, but I was thinking of revisiting the building, as crazy as it sounds. If it still stands, I may kill myself on the top floor. I'm a very unhappy individual, and although I hate my father, he was my reason to live. I have only lived this long to see him die.
Don't do it, man. Fuck. You wanna talk about it, or something? Fuck. Shit.
It's unfair for a stranger to try to talk me out of the one thing I want most in life. I don't want to talk about the suicide, but I'll talk more about the believed windwalker.
And now that I think about it, this sounds kinda like a Start of Darkness story. That's how you become an evil spirit. Living only to see your father die, and then coming back to the place where you first met this Wendigo, only to kill yourself just so you could complete the metamorphosis. But I'm no expert on Native American mythology.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Op doesn't realize it yet, but he's going to end up living forever.